Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Renew New Jersey, the fall 2023 webinar series on renewable energy. This is a collaboration between the Rutgers Earth Day Everyday program and the Marine Extension Program seminar series. So tonight's topic is what's happening with offshore wind off New Jersey. So we're looking forward to science and research-based information this evening on this topic. Go ahead to the next slide. And I'll introduce our speakers in a moment. Just to let you know, we will be having a poll open near the end of the seminar tonight. Your participation is voluntary. However, if you choose to participate, we use this information to help us improve our programs and see what people are learning and what actions they may take in response to the seminar. Go ahead. I also wanted to note that Rutgers, along with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, is an equal opportunity program provider. If you have any questions or comments about this, you can feel free to contact the Rutgers Extension Office, State Extension Office, and they'll be happy to help you with that. Go ahead. As I mentioned, the topic tonight, what's happening with offshore wind off New Jersey. So our speakers tonight, Doug Zemeckis and Josh Kohut. Doug is a county agent and associate professor with Rutgers Cooperative Extension. In his role, he conducts educational programming and applied research on issues related to fisheries, aquaculture, marine resource management, specifically in Ocean, Atlantic, and Monmouth counties, although also all over the state. Currently, some of these efforts involve offshore wind energy development and the impacts on fish and fisheries there. Josh Kohut also is from Rutgers University, a professor there at the Department of Marine and Coastal Sciences. He is a native of New Jersey, and his work includes working with partnerships and translating science into information that would benefit stakeholders in terms of the coastal ocean. So his research focuses on physical processes in the coastal ocean, along with biological and chemical processes, which in turn reflects the ecological system of these spaces. Currently, he does have work in storm intensity, offshore wind, local water quality, and regional fisheries on the U.S. coast. Also interestingly, polar ecosystems in coastal waters around Antarctica. Just a few administrative points tonight. We do have the chat set to off for this webinar. However, if you have questions, you can use the Q&A function, which if you look at your screen, it looks kind of like two chat bubbles. So we'll be moderating those questions as they come in and pass them to the speakers at the end of the seminar. I would like to just introduce myself. My name is Sal Mangiafico with Rutgers Cooperative Extension. And online tonight, we have other members of the Earth Day Everyday webinar series team. We are recording tonight, just so everyone's aware. And I think with that, I am ready to pass it over to our speakers. Thank you, Doug and Josh.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Sal, for the welcome and introduction. Thank you, everybody, for joining this evening. Josh Kohut and I will be co-presenting, tag-teaming the presentation tonight. Thanks for joining. I see a lot of new names, but also familiar names in the participants list. Hopefully, people are enjoying if they participated in the previous seminars in this Renew New Jersey series. We had Dave Specca a couple weeks ago talk about historical and future energy sources here in New Jersey. Dunbar Burney talked about solar. Tonight, we're going to talk about the hot topic, very important issue in New Jersey and beyond of offshore wind energy. And we'll have Serpil Garan talking about biofuels next week. But we're going to dive in here this evening into the important topic of offshore wind energy. I'll be up first for the first half approximately of our hour together, presenting an overview of offshore wind development off New Jersey and a bit of a regional look. Then Josh Kohut will present on the Rutgers University offshore wind initiatives related to research, education, workforce development, and other related topics as our state university responds to this important natural resource and ecosystem environmental issue here off New Jersey. Then we'll have a period of Q&A moderated by Sal. So I first started working on offshore wind back in 2017, and around then I got my hands on this national offshore wind strategy plan from the Department of Energy and Department of the Interior. I still use it as a good kickoff point for introducing offshore wind, and it also helped introduce me to it back 6-7 years ago now. But from that strategic plan, it looked at the energy sources in the United States. So this is not just New Jersey, but throughout the country in 2015 going forward to 2050. You see coal, gas, nuclear, and renewables. And catching your eye is this yellow area where projected retirements, particularly of coal, nuclear later on towards 2050, and a projected load growth from a growing human population here in the U.S. We have a need for increased energy production, increased diversification of energy to help meet the energy demands here in the U.S. Offshore wind is part of that plan in the U.S., including New Jersey and a variety of other states throughout the country to help meet these energy demands due to the energy system benefits to meet these energy needs, the anticipated environmental benefits from this renewable energy to help mitigate climate change impacts, and the anticipated economic benefits from new industry, new jobs, from shoreside infrastructure to the vessels that construct and maintain these turbines. I'm actually sitting right now in New Bedford, Massachusetts. Right after this webinar, I'm going out on a sea scallop research project. Right here on the waterfront is some of the components that they started constructing the first wind farm offshore in the U.S., Vineyard Wind. And coincidentally, Josh Kohut is in Halifax, Nova Scotia for a conference, and some of the components are also up there that are going to the wind farms in the U.S. So obviously a great deal of input to construct these wind farms from the components built on land, vessels coming from around the country and beyond. So there's a great deal of inputs, and most of the energy inputs in terms of come in the construction phase. I commonly get asked about the anticipated environmental benefits from offshore wind in terms of reduced greenhouse gases. This 2017 paper looked at the life cycle energy, so the energy input and the greenhouse gas emissions here on the carbon indicator, the grams of CO2 per kilomegawatt hour produced. And this includes construction, 25-year operations of offshore wind, and then decommissioning. Much of the greenhouse gases from the production of offshore wind development thereof is during construction, and then they're operating for 25 years. So about 16 grams of CO2 per kilomegawatt hour. You see in comparison to nuclear and much higher coal-fired, oil-fired power plants as an example. So it's not a carbon negative, but it's a cleaner carbon energy in terms of greenhouse gas emissions anticipated in comparison to other sources of energy. So offshore wind's being developed really throughout most of the U.S. There's different federal and state level processes that I'll introduce here. But the lead federal agency is BOEM, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management within the U.S. Department of the Interior. They oversee offshore energy and mineral resources. We in New Jersey are on the Atlantic Outer Continental Shelf. And offshore wind is being developed throughout much of our coastal areas throughout the U.S., but it's coming to the Northeast U.S. first. Some reasons why: meet those energy demands, help mitigate climate change, as I showed before, as an anticipated cleaner energy. But it's coming to the Northeast Shelf for several reasons. We have the majority of the U.S. population between the D.C.-Boston corridor, as you see from the 2020 population density by county. We have the people, we have the commerce, we use the energy. And if you look at the wind resource of the United States, if you've been down to the Jersey Shore, if you've been offshore, you've felt the wind, the sea breezes that Josh can tell you about, but also the other winds that are present off our coasts as the ocean atmospheric interactions. You can see here the mean annual wind speed, and you can see it's pretty predictable and pretty strong off our coasts. So there's the wind resource to be harvested and converted to energy. And if you've been on the West Coast or Alaska, if you've been out fishing, or you can see here, you don't have to go very far off, or it gets very deep very quickly. On contrast, along New Jersey, you have a broad outer continental shelf where you go out 70, 80 miles before you drop off to 600 feet or so. So the commercially operational technology now of bottom planted turbines are a conducive area along this continental shelf to construct those turbines mounted on the seafloor. Floating turbines for deeper areas are expected to be commercially operational within a few years. So offshore wind is coming to the Northeast U.S. With projects in various stages of development, while also being sited also elsewhere throughout the country. Here's the current state of leasing off our coast in New Jersey. So this is from the Mid-Atlantic Ocean Data Portal, which is a great tool. You can go on there and toggle a bunch of different ocean data from wildlife and marine mammals, fish, birds, to fisheries data, oceanographic data, but also looking at renewable energy related layers on the maps. So off New Jersey, we have several wind leases that were leased by developers from the federal government through the BOEM leasing process. And these are in federal waters, 3 miles and greater from the coast. Off New Jersey, we have Ørsted's Ocean Wind 1 and 2 projects, Atlantic Shores North and South. Those were leased in 2016, respectively. Empire Wind through Equinor was leased in 2017. These green areas, the New York Bight leases, were leased in February of 2022 by developers. As I mentioned, I'm sitting right now up here in New Bedford, Massachusetts, and these leases were leased earlier than off New Jersey and are in further stages of development with some construction recently started. All these lease areas went through a variety of different processes of public comment and evaluation before they came up with an area to be leased. They all started off as these larger call for information nomination areas, like you see further down in the Mid-Atlantic for potential future leasing of bottom mounted or in deeper water for floating turbines. But this is the current state of leasing and siting for some others in the future off the Northeast U.S. here in the Mid-Atlantic Bight. So if you go to the BOEM webpage, you can click by state and see what types of projects and where they are in different phases. For example, the different projects, the leasing history and state overview for New Jersey. And here is the timeline of the BOEM leasing process. So talking all federal waters for right now, these leases are beyond 3 miles from the coast in federal waters, and the leasing is administered by BOEM, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. The project furthest along off New Jersey is Ørsted's Ocean Wind 1. I'll use that as a talking point here. The auction for that lease happened in, I believe it was March of 2016. The first public meetings and task force meetings for those projects actually started way back in 2009, 7 years before the auction actually occurred. In that process, they planning an analysis phase, evaluated biological, non-biological, human, non-human uses of those areas to off southern New Jersey to come up with areas that are least conflicted by different users and develop wind energy areas that eventually became available for auction. Ørsted then developed their site assessment plan, their SAP, which is about a 5-year time period, which informed their COP, the construction operations plan, which I believe their first iteration was submitted in 2019, and therefore went through 4 years of environmental review on that construction operations plan. Earlier this year, BOEM issued their draft and then final environmental impact statement, recorded a decision with approving the COP conditionally with some modifications earlier this year, and construction just started on land for Ørsted's Ocean Wind 1 project. So the public meeting started in 2009. The first mobilization or constructed just started recently, 14 years later. We expect these projects, they will have a 25-year lifespan, at which point of decommissioning, all the money has to be put up in escrow account in the beginning for full removal at decommissioning of all turbines and cables. And offshore wind is coming to other areas and already started, as we saw, elsewhere in the country, but further to the north, draft call areas in the Gulf of Maine, deeper areas for floating technology turbines expected. There's wind energy areas to the south of us, North Carolina and South Carolina border. There was auction this summer for wind lease areas in the Gulf of Mexico off Texas and Louisiana. Last December, there were auctions off California, 5 wind farms, 3 lease areas off Southern, 2 off Northern were leased last December. And there's call areas off of Oregon. Now, wind, you see the rapid development here in the US. Also, as I didn't mention before, but we're learning a great deal where possible, different ecosystems, different size turbines, different species. But the European Union, the first offshore wind farm was constructed around 1994 and decommissioned 25 years later, back in around 2018. So there's been a longer history and operations, even decommissioning of offshore wind farms in the EU. Which set the stage also offshore wind, as you see being developed here, various stages of development, the 2022 map in the EU, but also coming in some Pacific countries as offshore wind's being developed around the world. So how does this work? What will it, the nuts and bolts and actually the turbines and cables, look like offshore once constructed? NYSERDA in New York has this great Offshore Wind 101 webpage to help understand some of the basics here of the different components of an offshore wind farm. We'll go through those in these slides here, but we'll have offshore, obviously, turbines, interconnecting cables to offshore substations that'll then transport the energy to shore to different interconnection points to enter into the power grid. We expect about 0.7 or 0.8 up to 1 nautical mile spacing between the turbines. Cables buried about 5 feet deep in the seafloor. You won't hit your head on them from the sea surface up to the lowest tip of the blade, about 65 to 100 feet. And these are very large structures, as you'll see in the next slides. They're about 850 to 1,100 feet tall above the sea surface. Each blade is almost about a football field long, about 100 meters, over 300 feet. So those are very large-scale turbines built offshore. The bottom-mounted turbines will have a variety of different foundations, monopile, jacket foundations. And in a couple years, commercially operational for some of those deeper areas will be different floating turbine technologies. In the infographic, about 1 spin of a turbine can power the average household for more than 2 days. So these very large blades capturing the wind energy can convert a good amount of energy in the nacelle that then gets transported through the cable system. So here's some of the other some foundations I just mentioned: monopile, tripod, jacket. Mostly monopile and jacket, I believe, off New Jersey. And as I noted, these are very large turbines, very large structures. The average onshore U.S. turbines under 500 feet. And these are much larger off the coast that you can construct, build them, construct the pieces, put them on barges and assemble them offshore with pallet jack barges. You can build actually a larger turbine offshore than you can maneuvering the pieces around roadways and constructing them on land. Right now in U.S., I should clarify what I mentioned before. The first commercial scale offshore wind farm, Vineyard Wind, the construction just recently started earlier this summer up here where I'm giving this talk from off Massachusetts. But there are 5 turbines off Block Island, Rhode Island that were constructed about 7 years ago now, and 2 experimental turbines off the state of Virginia. But the first commercially operational one, commercial scale wind farm construction started recently here with Vineyard Wind. There's different manufacturers of these turbines. A major player is GE as an example, at 12 megawatt turbines. You can see them in a 12 megawatt turbine from the sea surface to the top of the tip of the top blade, 850 feet tall approximately from the sea surface. Another example, so GE's 12 megawatt turbines are what are planned to be constructed by Ørsted's Ocean Wind 1 wind farm. Atlantic Shores offshore wind off southern New Jersey, also they're planning to go with a Vestas 15 megawatt turbine, considerably larger. These are about 1,100 feet tall. In perspective, I think the turbines in Atlantic City on land are about 300 something feet tall. The Ocean Casino is 750 feet approximately. So these are very, very large structures slated to be constructed off the coast. So far, I've been talking about the components of wind farms, previously the federal process, now talking a bit about the state level process. The leases are leased in federal waters by developers through BOEM, but then they need somebody to whom to sell the energy. So each state has their respective renewable energy goals, including through offshore wind energy. Governor Murphy last year increased New Jersey's offshore wind target through the Clean Energy Program to 11,000 megawatts. And that target is being worked towards through 7 different solicitations, where New Jersey receives bids from developers who already have federal leases to bid and put in proposals for projects to sell energy to New Jersey. The first solicitation went to Ørsted's Ocean Wind 1, and it was awarded Q2 of 19. Shortly thereafter, they submitted their construction operations plan. Counter to what's here, they expect to be partially and then fully commercially operational, now slated for 2025, 2026. The second solicitation was split, 2,600 megawatts approximately, between Ørsted's Ocean Wind 2 and Atlantic Shore's Offshore Wind. And that was awarded in 2021. The third solicitation, where developers submitted proposals to New Jersey, was issued earlier this year, closed this summer, and waiting announcement later this year what developers off New Jersey get OREX, offshore renewable energy credits, to sell energy to New Jersey through the third solicitation. So here is the now approved plan, construction operations plan of Ørsted's Ocean Wind 1 wind farm. Anticipated advertises 1,100 megawatts of energy, approximately 15 miles off the coast in southern New Jersey. 98 turbines, spaced 0.7 by 1 nautical mile apart. You see the 98 turbines, the interconnecting cables to 3 offshore substations, and then their planned cabling to shore, up along the coast under Island Beach State Park into the decommissioned Oyster Creek nuclear generating plant, and then also in under Ocean City to the decommissioned VL England plant. The Coast Guard and developers will not restrict access to fishing and boating access around the turbines, but there will be a safety buffer around the transfer stations, as a common question we get a bit, at least from access from the developers and from the Coast Guard, but still concerns about safe navigation and effective fishing, commercial and recreationally within these wind farms in the future. But this is the planned and approved development with onshore construction recently starting with some preparations on land for the cabling route with Ørsted started recently. If you want to dig in deeper, the approved construction operations plan is posted online. Some of it's redacted and confidential for particularly competition, I understand, amongst the developers. But you can see the construction plan, the mitigation measures taken with respect to fisheries communication outreach, marine mammal issues, sea turtles, birds and bats. See some of the mitigating measures and anticipated environmental impacts to these different human and non-human users of this area with Ørsted's Ocean Wind 1. So as I mentioned, the first iteration of the COP was submitted in 2019, the construction operations plan. It went through review for the anticipated environmental impacts from this project by a variety of federal and state agencies. The draft environmental impact statement came out a few months before the final environmental impact statement came out this May. The lead agency is BOEM. Other cooperating federal agencies include NOAA, the Department of Defense, Homeland Security, EPA, Park Service, just to name a few. Also New Jersey DEP, New York, Department of State, Board of Public Utilities in New Jersey. What this environmental statement impact did was assess the reasonably foreseeable impacts from the wind farm on physical, biological, socioeconomic, and cultural resources and the mitigating measures. Ultimately approved the construction operations plan with some modifications, and then issued the ROD, the record of decision, which gave this project the go-ahead to continue. For this and the other wind farms, if you want to see where they are at different stages, you can go to the federal permitting dashboard. Pretty cool tool, not just for offshore wind, but other federal projects. You can go to the dashboard, type in a project, this case, Ocean Wind 1, see the information, you see the different federal environmental review when they were submitted, the timelines, and then you can click on these and get some additional information about the project. So a cool portal if you're getting involved and want to learn more about an individual project. As mentioned, Atlantic Shores Offshore Wind is a partnership between EDF Renewables and Shell. They got a part of the second solicitation, as you saw, to the state of New Jersey, planning to power over 700,000 homes from the construction of a wind farm out at Atlantic Shores Offshore Wind. I believe the most recently available version publicly of their construction operations plan is September of 21. And they, through their OREX to New Jersey, are planning to develop project number 1 and are seeking, in their COP, they put forward broader plans in the event that they get approval from a solicitation from New Jersey to develop further. But through their first round of OREX, is this project number 1, planned cabling route underneath Atlantic City. Future cabling could include all the way up to Monmouth County into Seagirt, making use of some other existing interconnecting points and infrastructure. A lot of telecommunication and fiber optics cables already make landfall in Seagirt, so there's some already existing infrastructure there as an example. These would be the turbines closest to shore in all the Northeast. About the first ones here were 9.8 miles. Planned as part of their construction operations plan from Brigantine, so quite close to shore, closer than in other states. But in their draft environmental impact statement, which I'll introduce in a moment, I believe those closest to shore have already been removed from the plan to help mitigate visual impacts to those along the coast here in New Jersey. So you can take a look here, and also with Ørsted, they do have visual impact assessments available in their construction operations plans. This is Northern Brigantine as it stands now on a beautiful summer day. And as an example, here is project 1 of Atlantic Shores Offshore Wind to get an idea of some of the visibility of these projects close to shore off southern New Jersey from Northern Brigantine in this case. As I mentioned, you can go online. Also, the draft environmental impact statement includes some of the mitigating measures already of removing those that were closest to shore in the original plans. This draft statement came out in May of this year. There was public comment, meetings and webinars and in person earlier this year. Some of you may have attended. And then maybe we'll see the final environmental impact statement and come out pretty soon on this project, you might anticipate. With that, obviously, these are very lengthy, complicated processes. The Special Initiative on Offshore Wind developed this public participation guide for New Jersey. You can check online, you can print out this whole guide. It's like a blueprint for a large building, but it talks about the different state permit and approval processes shown here, but also the federal, I think there's 18 different federal environmental acts that these projects are evaluated under to evaluate and help mitigate the impacts to resources and ecosystems. And this can help you key in on some of the ways as an individual citizen or some of the groups you might be involved with, how you can help make progress through the public comment on the state and federal permit and approvals, written public meetings as an example. So these are this will help guide you a bit for getting involved as a citizen and with different organizations with which you might be involved that are active in offshore wind. But also we as the state university at Rutgers University, fulfilling our land grant mission to help meet the needs of stakeholders and communities and industries in New Jersey. We have been very active at Rutgers University in research, education, outreach events such as these to help support the responsible development of offshore wind off New Jersey. And I'll pitch it to Josh now to speak more about Rutgers' involvement in this space.
Awesome. Thank you, Doug. Great summary of a very complex project outline. And what I want to talk about is some of the ways in which Rutgers University is participating in the offshore wind activities off the coast, as well as throughout the region. And I'll start off with this diagram to speak to the capacity that Rutgers has in this space. We have a offshore wind collaborative, which is a grassroots effort to coordinate activity from Camden, New Brunswick, Newark-based faculty, as well as faculty throughout our extension presence in all the counties across the state. And this covers a wide range of topics related to offshore wind. The diagram on the right kind of summarizes that into three sort of primary quadrants. Or not a quadrant if it's three. I don't know what the word is for three, actually. But the lower slice of pizza, the three-piece pizza, is more of the engineering aspects of offshore wind. So materials, manufacturing, connecting to the grid, integration with existing grid infrastructure. In the upper right are some of the economic, policy, and social aspects of offshore wind. And so we have faculty that are thinking about those aspects of offshore wind. On the upper left, which I'll spend most of my time speaking about, is some of the environmental, fisheries, and multi-use aspects of the ocean space where offshore wind is being leased and where it is currently being developed. And then a key piece is that central part of this diagram, which is two primary focuses. One is on education and workforce development. And this is not just in the work that we do with our own students and preparing them to enter a workforce, whatever workforce they choose to enter. But it's also partnering with institutions across the state who are working on education at different levels, from elementary and kindergarten all the way up to public outreach as examples of the webinar series here that you're participating in. So that workforce and awareness development is an important piece. And then central to that is our engagement with the different stakeholder communities. So the research that we are undertaking is collaborative. It's in partnership with communities throughout the state. It's one of the great things. I get to work with Doug and his colleagues who have connections at the community level so that we can make sure that the research that's being conducted is not only relevant and has application to communities across the state, but is also informed by the expertise that those communities have on different aspects of the research that we're conducting. So it truly is a partnership. And I can go into some detail on some of these. You've heard from some of the folks on this diagram already. Dunbar spoke just last week, and you'll hear from Serpil next week. And what we're aiming to do here is to ensure that the expertise that exists within New Jersey is able to participate, able to contribute to the development of something like this for New Jersey, because we recognize that it's, in my opinion, this is Josh's opinion, it's very important that the science is informing the process. And New Jersey has a wealth of expertise that exists, and it's not just at Rutgers. There are partnerships across the state, different research entities, either academic or non-academic, the private sector, and the great capacity in the different state agencies that are involved. So it truly is a collaborative effort, which is why it was easy to name this as the Offshore Wind Energy Collaborative. And if you would like more information, please visit the website. You can see it listed there. I'm going to talk about primarily what's happening in the upper left of that pinwheel. You can go ahead to the next slide, Doug. Thanks. Which is to think about, and these are the research areas. So my background is in physical oceanography, which means I am very interested to understand how and why the ocean moves. But in particular, I'm interested in what makes parts of the ocean more productive for the ecology. Why do fish migrate the way they migrate? What drives marine mammal movements through an area that might be related to the location of a front in the ocean or some feature in the ocean? And so my role in the particular pieces are the collaborative projects that I'm involved in are really looking to try and understand that central part of this slide, that dynamic environment. The ocean changes. The ocean is very dynamic. It's changing based on tide. It's changing from events. It's changing over climate scales. And so when we think about how we plan for or mitigate impacts of a facility that will exist for 30 years in the ocean, we have to understand how the ocean moves. And there are industries that have been working in the ocean that have been doing this for centuries. Fishing is a great example. Fishers are incredible in the way that they can respond to the ocean variability to find the fish that they seek. And so what our interest here is to try and bring that extensive knowledge that we have about the dynamic environment and think about how that drives an equally dynamic ecology, and how that might inform planning, decision-making related to offshore wind. There's no place on the planet that undergoes a larger temperature change from summer to winter of the surface ocean than the one off our coast. And that incredibly dynamic change from summer to winter leads to a highly migratory ecology. And we have decades, if not longer, records of that variability. And so if we are to develop offshore wind in a place, this is not a bad place to do it because we have that knowledge base. We can bring that knowledge to the process. So the next slide talks about how we're doing that. I want to make sure I know this is recorded, and so you can see another resource. We don't have time to go through all of this, but this is a website that we put up to describe the types of projects that we're involved in that are related to offshore wind, but are focusing on the environmental and the living resource impacts and interactions of offshore wind. And so if you click on this website on your free time, because right now I know you really want to pay attention to Doug and I, but check that website out because it will give you more details on some of the projects. I'll summarize them briefly here. The next slide talks about one of those projects. You can go ahead and switch it, Doug. Thanks. This is an industry-based effort. So there was a call that went out for groups that wanted to respond to a regulatory requirement of the Ocean Wind 1 project led by Ørsted, and that was to conduct an independent before, during, and after construction survey for different fisheries and fish species in and around the Ocean Wind lease site. And so Rutgers, along with our partners, you can see the partners there, Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, the University of Rhode Island, and Monmouth University, put together a plan where you can see the methods listed there. There's 7 different survey methodologies that we are doing. We're collecting those data. We're making those data publicly available. And we're using that survey techniques before, during, and after the construction of Ocean Wind 1. And again, this is a study that's as part of the regulatory process for that particular project. I won't have time to go into all the details, but the methods that are in there have undergone the rigor of scientific review. There's a whole peer review process that goes into this. And so we are those experts that are put in place to conduct these surveys before, during, and after in a very transparent way. Next slide. Another program, and I encourage you to check out this website. A lot of resources getting presented tonight. But this is a program stood up by the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities and the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. It's called the Research and Monitoring Initiative. It's actually resourced by those developers that have been awarded solicitations. As part of that solicitation, they are required to contribute $10,000 per megawatt awarded to that project to this Research and Monitoring Initiative. This monitoring initiative is administered by both BPU and DEP, and they are funding, I think up till now, I think there's 12 different projects that they are funding, and these are research projects that are specific to fisheries and environmental aspects of the New Jersey coastal waters. And so projects range from, I'll show a couple that Rutgers are involved in, but there are whale and seal tagging studies that are being done. There is an eDNA survey for the entire New Jersey coastal waters. There's a animal telemetry study that's being done. A couple examples of some of the work that Rutgers researchers are involved in. The next slide is a more of a what we would call a desktop study. So we're not actually putting equipment in the water, but this is a partnership with Rutgers, Monmouth University, the National Renewable Energy Lab, which is a independent but associated research institution of the Department of Energy, as well as the Special Initiative on Offshore Wind, have put together a project where we're going to explore the ability of putting sensors or monitoring equipment on the turbines themselves to the benefit of the broader community. So what are some of those data sets that we could take advantage of the fact that there's structure offshore to collect those data, make them publicly available? And who are the stakeholders that could benefit from such information? What are those things? So that's an example of that type of project. The next slide is a project that's being done in coordination with the surf clam and surf clam fishery. This is work being led by Daphne Monroe, Jason Morrison, and Grace Saba at Rutgers. The intent here is to, with the industry, design a different type of clam dredge that could be used not only to sample different age classes of clams, so the grading can be adjusted so you can harvest younger clams, older clams, which is important when we start thinking about stock assessment and understanding the health and longevity of a fishery. It's also equipment that has been modified that may be a more fishable gear within a wind farm. And so this has all been done in coordination with the industry, the commercial fishing industry. The first surveys were done last year. They were done in coordination with the federal survey, so that there can be overlap between those, again, to ensure the scientific integrity of the data being collected so that it can be used and verified for a regulatory process, in this case, tracking and setting quotas for the surf clam fishery. The next slide. This is a project that myself and Grace Saba at Rutgers are partnered with Mark Baumgartner at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. And we at Rutgers have been developing the use of autonomous underwater vehicles for 25 years now. I like to brag that Rutgers is one of the places that around the world has the most extensive experience with these types of vehicles. And that experience has been gained off the coast of New Jersey. And what we're doing with the state is we are deploying underwater robots that are equipped with sensors that can measure simultaneously everything from the ocean physics, things like temperature, salinity, and density, ocean chemistry from pH and dissolved oxygen, as well as the biology and ecology. The green variables there, I know there's some acronyms here, but these are measures of the primary producers in the ocean. These are phytoplankton, ways to measure phytoplankton concentrations. And then the pink variables that are on the right column here are allowing us to get up through the food web. So active acoustics that are tuned to detect schools of fish, active acoustics that are tuned to detect schools of zooplankton. These are prey species for different other target taxa, including marine mammals and larger fish. We have passive acoustics to detect those marine mammal movements and migration, as well as telemetry, tracking fish that have been tagged. And so the power here is that with these data all collected at the same time, we can start to look for associations of occurrence of different marine mammals, for example, or prey concentrations, and how those overlap with measures of oceanography from temperature, salinity, all the way up to the base of the food web. And so that allows us to start to look at habitat preference for different animals. And again, we're recognizing and we're accounting for the fact that those habitats move, that there is movement that's happening on different time scales from seasons to multi-year to multi-decade. And we're using these data to get 4 seasonal deployments a year for 2 years before construction begins, so that we can get some of that baseline information that will augment the existing baseline we have for decades of ocean sampling that we've been doing in this area. Next slide. Another example that I want to show is a partnership again with the Ocean Wind 1 project. And the interest here was to identify ways in which we could not only monitor the movements of marine mammals, but could we start to take those associations with the data to try and understand better habitat. So this was a project that was in partnership with Woods Hole Oceanographic, the University of Rhode Island, and Axiom, a private company that is working on data sharing and data systems. And so the idea here was, could we deploy a glider that you see here on the lower part of the screen as well? That's the actual glider, equipped with a hydrophone. And the hydrophone is right in the middle of the vehicle there, right there. Thanks, Doug. That is a hydrophone. So it's the ear that the glider has to listen for calls from marine mammals. And the power, again, of this glider on the right is the different data sets that glider collects. So in the upper panel, you're looking at seawater temperature. The reds are warmer water, the blues are colder water. And that particular plot is showing the surface of the ocean on top and the bottom of the ocean underneath. And you can see we're going into shallower and deeper areas as the glider makes its way through its mission. And so what we're able to do, the red squares at the top, the rectangles at the top of each plot, is where we heard, in this case, North Atlantic right whales. And so we can start to look at the oceanographic conditions and where and when we're detecting these animals to start to work with the marine mammal experts, the oceanographic experts, to see if we can start to understand some of those specific habitat characteristics and how that might help ensure that any ocean use that we have in the coastal areas are considering these habitat characteristics and making mitigation plans appropriately if there happen to be in a place where there's higher risk of encountering a right whale or lower risk, but appropriate mitigation measures are taken. Finally, we're not doing this in a vacuum. There's a lot of effort that's happening at the regional level to coordinate these efforts. They're bringing together expertise from a wide range of stakeholder communities to think about and identify priorities for this research. One example is the Regional Wildlife Science Collaborative for offshore wind. You can see the link there. They are focused on taxa that range from marine mammals, sea turtles, avian and bat species, to endangered fish species. And then on the right is another organization called ROSA, the Responsible Offshore Science Alliance. And this is a collection of experts from the wind developer, the commercial and recreational fishing industries, as well as the research institutions, to think about fisheries and fishing impacts of offshore wind. And so these are more focused on the commercial and recreational fisheries. And I think that's my last slide. Happy to take questions and answer questions, but wanted to give you that overview and stress that we take our role in this very seriously, and our emphasis is on the data and being very transparent in what we're doing. And so we want to make sure that you have access to those websites, and the data that we produce is made publicly available, and welcome questions.
Sal, you're muted. I see you're talking.
Thanks, Doug. I thought I hit the unmute button.
I'm
I was
sure
just going to say thank you both. I learned a lot. I think I can represent the lay people on this topic. Certainly very interesting. We do have some questions. We certainly have time for questions. I did launch the poll. So those attending the webinar, you should be seeing a poll now. If you're willing to participate in that, please complete that. You can do that as we're discussing some of these questions. So starting off, the offshore wind turbines, are they designed to handle hurricane force winds? If so, what category or what other impacts are they able to withstand?
I believe, good question, one I commonly get. I believe they're constructed to take a direct hit from a Category 4 storm, if that's correct, Josh, and they have the capability to shut down and rotate to reduce the shear on the turbine itself to help withstand that pressure from those types of storms. And I believe it's built up to a Category 4. Is that right, Josh?
Yeah, I can't remember if it's 3 or 4, but so one of the things that we benefit from is that these turbines are not newly deployed, right? Europe has an experience, but they have quite a different wind environment. So in Europe in the North Sea, it's pretty windy. 40 knots is not unusual, but what is unusual to get a hurricane, right? So it's a different design envelope. And so the engineers work with the manufacturers to get the criteria. And I met with a group down in the Gulf of Mexico who is working on analyses to identify turbines and blades in particular that are designed to withstand stronger hurricanes, particularly the ones that frequent the Gulf of Mexico. And so, yeah, as Doug described, the turbines are designed to have a cut in and a cut out wind speed. My understanding that most of the turbines that are being constructed in the next several years have a max operation of around 40 knots or so, and then above that they will shut the turbines down and try and ride out the event.
Okay, there's a question in general about negative impacts on sea life, in particular about disturbing the ocean floor, considering mammals, invertebrates, fish. Can you say anything about that?
Yeah, I could take the fish question, particularly, and Josh, see what comes to mind for you. Josh mentioned there, you showed a program, a fisheries monitoring plan that we at Rutgers are leading with other partners, for example, Ørsted's Ocean Wind 1, and all the wind farms, as Josh noted, it's a requirement through BOEM, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, to fund fisheries monitoring plans to evaluate these impacts from wind farm construction on fishery resources. We have 7, 8, or 9 surveys here, and all the other wind farms are in different stages developing, seeing 3 to 6, 8 different surveys, before after control impact surveys, to evaluate the impacts. So not necessarily, if we observe an impact on summer flounder, probably won't necessarily stop the project, but it will help to go into other different initiatives that are happening. BOEM, with a variety of federal, state partners, are developing a fisheries mitigation and compensation plan. Whereas if there are disruptions to fish behavior in response to cabling or turbine construction, including cumulative impacts from multiple, developing plans to help mitigate and compensate those, such as surf clam seeding in other areas, if the large vessels are not anticipated to be able to access the wind farms, the commercial side, particularly bottom trawl, surf clam dredge, sea scallops. So disruption to their fishing operations, some mitigation measures would be potentially working with local aquaculture hatcheries to seed open areas with surf clams as one example, or even to compensation of direct payments for impacts. That plan will soon be released. The drafts were released a year or two ago now, but these fisheries monitoring plans in response to BOEM regulations are being carried out at the wind lease areas to evaluate impacts before and after construction. And it's in development now on how different entities, federal and state agencies as examples, will respond to the impacts that might be observed.
Okay.
And one thing I would add is, and I mentioned it briefly in my comments, is that the ocean is an incredibly dynamic place. And so significant effort goes into the design of these studies so that we can isolate the impacts of the actual projects from all the other variability that happens. The ocean changes frequently. There are many things that relate to things that change in the ocean environment. And it's our responsibility as the science teams that are doing some of these projects, and any team to make sure that we're designing a study that meets that scientific rigor. And that is done through a process of building on what's been done before. It's reviewed extensively. And so the work that's being done is collecting the data in a way that allows us to assess those impacts. And it's similar to what's been done in Europe in those projects, but it's adapted to the specific conditions off the New Jersey coast or wherever a particular project in the US is being slated for construction.
Can you mention anything specific about birds?
Yeah, I just saw that question in the Q&A. So there are several projects that are exploring different technologies to monitor bird migration, whether they're tagged, birds that actually get tagged, and you can track where they go with tags. There's also radar systems that are tracking the movements of animals. There's a DOE, Department of Energy funded project called Wildlife and Offshore Wind, which is bringing together experts from across the globe to come up with the rigor to design the monitoring for birds, bats, among other species, and then thinking about how to assess specific risk of projects to those species given the data that's collected.
How about whales? That was another question.
The impact on whales?
Yes.
Yeah, so the project that's shown here, that's one example of where data is being collected, and there's quite an extensive array of hydrophones now that are being deployed to monitor the movement of marine mammals in and around these lease areas, to understand that movement so that those decisions or those movement maps can be used to aid decision making on when or a project may or may not go, or what mitigation. There's pretty extensive mitigation that's already in place with professional observers on every vessel. There's a pretty rigorous review that goes through all of the project aspects that Doug laid out. And so the goal of the research from our perspective is to see how we could bring in what we know about the moving ocean and what we will hopefully be able to share about the whales relative to that moving ocean to help inform some of those mitigations.
Okay. There were a couple questions about decommissioning the turbines. One about are the bases of the turbines left? Do they become naturalized after so many years on the ocean floor? And then also the disposition of the materials. For example, if the blades are reused or recycled or refurbished.
Yeah, I'll take that, and Josh, see if you have any additional thoughts. But my understanding, as the anticipation since the start of this being sited here off New Jersey, is that at the end of the projects, all cables and turbines every inch will be removed at the end of the 25-year lifespan of the projects. And all those funds need to be put up in the beginning in an escrow account in order to be able to remove that at the end of the project. There are some stakeholders in the fisheries world who are opposed to offshore wind and don't want to see the turbines due to the potential impacts with fish and fisheries. There are others that are looking forward to the presence of the turbines and the artificial reef effects, as an example, the habitat it might provide to augment the existing 20+ artificial reefs as part of New Jersey's network. Some in that camp actually have commented that they prefer to see maybe something like you have in the Gulf of Mexico, where the rigs to reef program, where the decommissioned oil rigs are left, or they're cut in half and toppled over to maintain habitat for finfish and other marine life. The anticipation, though, and some of those conversations have happened for our neck of the woods around wind energy, but I believe the plan is for full decommissioning and removal of everything at the end of the project.
How about there's a question about navigation of commercial vessels through that area?
Yeah, that is a concern. In fact, National Academies of Science independent peer review expert panel came out with a report of the impacts of offshore wind farms on vessel-based radar systems. In certain conditions, there could be significant impacts on those radar systems. So that's just for vessels who are navigating with radar, let alone a lot of our recreational vessels don't have or don't know how to operate their radar. So marine safety is a significant concern here. One example of a program in development that was announced years ago, Ørsted is working to develop a program that would help improve the safety capabilities of particularly recreational fishing vessels in New Jersey, outfitting them with improved training on using their radar, anticipate probably for the impacts that turbines might have, captain navigation trainings as an example. And also a major one that is being discussed, I'm not quite sure where it is in terms of commitment from developers, but is the presence of AIS, identification systems, beacons on all or a subset of the turbines, and that AIS systems on the vessels will help seafarers be aware of where the turbines are in the event that there is any impacts on their radar, or also just for if there's any periods of rough weather and reduced visibility. On the fishery side, the RODA, Responsible Offshore Development Alliance, they put out a survey probably 2 years ago now to the commercial fishing industry about different lighting and paint colors and some of these mitigation measures to help safety elements with the fishing industry.
Here's another one. Would you know, in terms of energy output, how to compare, say, one nuclear power plant to one of these offshore wind arrays?
Yeah, Doug, I can take that one. So my understanding is Oyster Creek, before it was decommissioned, was providing about 650 megawatts of continuous energy to the grid. And so if you think about, for example, the Ocean Wind 1 site, that's 1,100 megawatts. Now that is not continuous, right? Because the wind resource varies. And so they've done the calculation, and my understanding is that it's about 60% of that number. So roughly ballpark, you're thinking the Ocean Wind 1 lease area or Ocean Wind 1 project is about equivalent to the energy that you would get from one nuclear power plant.
Great, thanks. And in terms of impacts on the ocean ecology or, say, the fishing industry, how would you compare the impacts of, say, cooling water that might be from a conventional plant or a nuclear power plant to any of the effects of the wind turbines?
It's a good question, an interesting one too, especially a segue from the question that Josh just fielded. The different impacts and in different locations. For example, the Oyster Creek nuclear plant is, Forked River, New Jersey, decommissioned 2019. Soon we hope to host in one of our extension programs, Motts, Tom Grotus from Rutgers University, other partners from Rutgers, DEP, and elsewhere. They've been monitoring the impacts after the decommissioning on larval fish and eggs, ichthyoplankton, eggs and larval fish, and water quality in Barnegat Bay. Before and after that decommissioning. So we'll get a better idea of what a decommissioning of a nuclear power plant looks like right here in New Jersey, and the site where the cabling route will come in will be constructed for Ocean Wind 1. So different ecosystem in the estuary. So some of the same species, some of the adults, but a lot of the young of the year juveniles that have, been shown and do get caught up in there. Some species had benefited from the warm water effluent from that, while others might more negatively impacted by the hot water outflow, plus the mortality that led from the inflow into that system. So we'll soon have more information from that monitoring, but I anticipate, it'll be tough to compare little apples and oranges compared to what we all expect to see offshore from a wind farm.
Of course.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that is that, it's incredibly important when you think about impact assessment and what particular species might be impacted, that you think about the whole environment that these species are in. And there are many things that impact our coastal ocean. There are many things that happen on different scales. And if we're going to understand and assess the impact of a particular project or a particular component of a project, we need to understand that context. And the good news is in this area, we have a lot of experience understanding that context. And so it's important to think about the system as a whole so that we can make decisions that understand the system as a whole.
Okay, so there were certainly a bunch of thank yous from the audience. So I did want to mention that. I think overall there's several questions or comments where there is concern about the fisheries industry, ocean life, safety. I'm sure you're both aware those have come up often in these discussions. So I won't try to reiterate them all for you here. If you had any general comments to wrap up later, that's fine. And along with that, comparisons to other power sources, other options for renewable or conventional energy. But maybe one final question. What has been learned by looking at, for example, European offshore wind energy, and how it's applied here, learning their lessons and applying that here?
So I can start maybe, Doug, and you can fill in what I leave out.
That's good.
But I would say, so we do benefit from the fact that offshore wind has been deployed in parts of the world for over 25 years. A lot of the scientific literature on how to assess impacts that have been identified are based on research that's been done in those facilities. So that provides a good benefit for us. We can see how some of those methods were employed and what is relevant to particular questions that we're seeking to answer. But we also want to make sure that it's clear that the North Sea is not the coast of New Jersey. And so there are things that we can learn from that experience, but we need to apply them to the particular conditions that we get off the coast of New Jersey. I mentioned in my comments that there's no place on the planet that sees the seasonal variability that we see. They do see seasonal variability in the North Sea, but it's not as extreme as what we might have here. And so those differences we understand because we have been studying, and I mean not Rutgers, I mean the oceanographic community has been studying this for over 100 years in the scientific literature. So we have a pretty good idea of a lot that's happening off our coast. And now it's taking what's been learned in Europe and applying it to that knowledge base that we have here so that we can make sound decisions.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. A few other thoughts that came to mind there where I spend most of my time on fish and fisheries is Josh and I participated in 2020, I think it was, fall 2020. ROTA, the Responsible Offshore Development Alliance, hosted I think that one was the Synthesis of the Science, or the Synthesis of the Science workshop, which we had international participants from around the world to summarize the work that they saw for fish and fisheries response and other ecological response to the wind farms in the EU over a 25-year period. And ROTA took that information from that workshop and partnered with the scientific community, university, federal, state agencies, and developed a Synthesis of the Science report that just came out earlier this year, looking at finfish, shellfish, environmental, oceanographic included, impacts that could be anticipated based upon what we learned from the EU. So that's a great guide. Some of the species overlap, but the scale of development, the size of the turbines, the spacing in the EU, they restrict access to fishing. Here, will not be the case based upon the Coast Guard and developers. So we have a very different system, but synthesizing the science there that helped us to better understand some species structure associated in particular responded positively, which was seen with the 5 turbines off Block Island, Rhode Island. There was a significant increase after construction in black sea bass, a bit of an increase in cod. But other species like winter, I think little skate, monkfish that are very important to the commercial fisheries, they were declined maybe regionally, but also locally around the site of those 5 turbines. So we are learning from the EU, but also from southern New England as these projects come to New Jersey.
Great, thank you. To the audience, I did want to say we didn't get to everyone's specific question, but I think we hit a lot of the broad topic areas that were there. Our speakers will be able to see these questions afterwards, so they will see your questions and comments. And I do thank everybody for posing those questions and comments. I know our speakers do need to run, so we can't go too late. So I think we're going to have to wrap up the question and answer period now. If you haven't completed the poll and you'd like to do so, please do so. And I would like, on behalf of everybody, to thank our two speakers tonight. I certainly learned a lot. It wasn't a topic I have been following very much lately, so I definitely appreciate having you two here to give us some of the science behind some of the questions on this topic.
Thank you. And I'll just finish by thanking the audience. We see some of the questions coming in. We recognize this is an emotional topic. Definitely encourage you to look at the resources that we put out there. Ask the questions about the science. Our obligation is to ensure that we're providing the science. We have to make sure the data supports the things that we say. And that's really important. Totally understand the emotion of the topic, and we want to be a resource. And so if you have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. The one thing I did not mention, I saw there were some questions about the effects of the turbines themselves on the environment and the ecology. I want to point people to the National Academies. If you search National Academies hydrodynamics, a report was just issued last week on the scientific review. It's gone through peer review about what some of those impacts are. And so I encourage you to check that out. Maybe, Sal, we can work through you and we can get that link sent out to those that are interested. I did see a bunch of questions related to the environmental impacts of the turbines themselves.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you, everyone. And I hope everyone has a good night and a good week.